Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Thanks for joining this webinar on digital product release. We're specifically targeting some of our customers who use Release Management v2 just to share more about our new release management product, which is digital product release. And we're going to talk about some of the tools we have to help you migrate from Release Management v2 to DPR, but also give you an overview of what DPR is, what it can do, and give you a pretty handy demo to watch. Before we jump into the agenda, always need to start with this safe harbor notice. This presentation might have some forward-looking statements. That's based on what we currently believe with the information we have available, but please don't take anything we say as set in stone. Things that are forward-looking could change and may. For today's agenda, I'm going to start with brief introductions of your speakers. Then we're going to jump into some overview about the evolution of release governance in the enterprise, then look at DPR specifically and give you an overview of what DPR is, how it works, and then from there jump into a demo. We have time for Q&A at the very end, but please don't hesitate to ask questions throughout. You can either raise your hand or use the Q&A in the Zoom chat. We have a few folks on the call who can help answer those Q&A questions, and we'll also flag some to answer live if we think it's broadly applicable. All right, so let's start with intros. My name is Kalen Castello. I am an outbound product manager focusing specifically on our modern governance products within ICSM, of which digital product release is one. I've been with ServiceNow for about 2 years now. And Colin, over to you.
Yeah, certainly. So everybody, and for whatever reason, Zoom has decided I cannot turn my camera on. So you'll have that nice picture of me in the introductions. But my name is Colin O'Brien. I'm a part of the inbound product management team. I've been with ServiceNow going on 10 years, and I'm focused currently on our digital product release application. And then also, although not on the slide, you may either see question responses from Joe or Balaji. They're both also a part of our product management team. And we'll be helping out in the Q&A in the chat.
Perfect. All right. While I pull up this poll, I see Sam already has a question. So Sam, I don't know way to let you off mute. Sam, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, just we've got a user that's unable to get in. Says their registration is pending approval.
Okay, I will look into that. Thank you.
Jocko.
Okay. All right. While I look into that, I'm going to launch this poll question. All right. So for those on the call, just wanted to gauge your familiarity with DPR ahead of this session. Maybe it's your first time hearing about it. Maybe you've heard about it in previous webinars. Maybe you've already installed it and started playing around with it. Maybe you're planning to install it or implement it rather. We'd love to learn more. I'll pick this up. I'll give this about 5 more seconds. Okay, I just approved Jocko, so hopefully he'll be able to join now. All right, looks like the vast majority of folks on the call are unfamiliar with DPR, so that's great to hear. Hopefully you get a lot of value out of this session, learning more about what it is, how it works, and how it can help you. And a few others who have some familiarity with it, so hopefully this is still helpful for you.
Am I still unmuted?
You are.
Okay, so just as a point of reference to you, this came off of, we have some heavy users in release management, and got the email that release management wasn't going to be supported anymore. So a lot of people are just kind of seeing, okay, what's this about? What is it? And, you know, we're not looking to move anytime soon, but it's kind of a FYI to the future.
Yeah, totally fair.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take over sharing. So let me, for those that are learning about the shift to the new product from Release Management v2, keep in mind that through your current contract, Release Management v2 will be supported. And even after that that period is ended, we actually get very few support cases for release management v2, primarily because out of the box, it's mostly a collection of tables. So for those, and this is going to be one of the poll questions because I am interested in how much customization you all have done to release v2. By and large, most customers have enhanced it to the point where it's like your own product. So I think over the past year, we've gotten a total of 6 cases. And so even once your support contract is over, we're not uninstalling release v2, but going forward, and I mean, there haven't been any updates to release v2, I think, since either New York, so several years ago. It will continue to be in your instance. So the move to digital product release, which is the next evolution in our support for release management, it can be made side by side. It does not have to be made immediately. And we are working on, we actually have some utilities to help with the migration. And a part of one of the last poll questions is to get feedback on, are there other areas that we could help through that transition? So it's just for everyone to keep in mind, it's not going to be uninstalled. And there's a good chance that you haven't even opened a support case in years for release v2. So you'd be able to continue to use it as you're doing today. Although, as I hope that many of you on the call will do is start the transition, because I have been a part of, like, my name has been attached to release management v2 as the owner of it for some time. I want to say 6 or 7 years, but that's not been my primary product. Somebody needed to be able to talk to customers or triage any cases that were coming in that we might need to make updates to. But during that time, as I've talked with customers, we have seen a shift. The reason why release v2 was really positioned more as a framework was because there wasn't a lot of consensus as to what release management should be back when it came out, which predates me. So again, I've been at ServiceNow for about 10 years. The previous owner for it, who's also still with ServiceNow, she and I talk pretty regularly. She had it before then, and it predates her, and she's been here 12 years. So back going 10, 15 years ago, the release space was not well defined. Fast forward to today, and we've seen a shift in the market, especially on release being about how we deliver products, applications, software. The term, there's lots for them, but we've seen a shift to where teams are more involved in the release process. They're trying to release applications. They're trying to release, I use the term products. And so we're helping with this transition where I have several customers that are using DPR today that are more project oriented, but even those projects are enhancing products, which is what actually gets released. And once we get into the CMDB side, application services are what are being updated. And so DPR has taken an approach where we're helping customers manage the release process for software-based applications, at least for now. We have roadmap items for more types of releases, but that's where we started because I think greater than 90% of our customers were really using it for software-oriented releases. Well, we can help through that transition, because one other thing that we saw a lot of the challenges, again, I've been talking with customers about this for quite some time, is as products are getting more complex, as the release process is getting more complex, it's taking a lot of time to validate things. As teams are becoming more involved, they don't necessarily know what the criteria is from an organization's perspective on releasing. They just their code compiles, it deploys with their pipelines, and there may be other governance requirements that are necessary. But also, as we decentralize into teams, there's less visibility by the central governance side, by central change teams, central governance teams to know what's going on. And also, I've been hearing that we've overloaded the change management process with release concepts. So it's made change a much bigger process than it needs to be. It makes it more cumbersome. Change is also, when you're trying to do a one-size-fits-all for all of your release process and your change process, it can become difficult to maintain over time. So we're working to help by bringing in automation as kind of a native concept within DPR. We're trying to make it so teams are aware of how we know that we're done, while not losing visibility for the central teams to understand what's coming down the pipe and being able to validate that the teams have completed everything, as well as a more explicit interaction between change and release. So instead of changes being loosely coupled with release, the way it is in release v2, by default, we have a stronger, more dedicated connection between change and release for DPR. So these are just some of the challenges that we've been hearing and why we decided to go back and build DPR, digital product release, from the ground up based on the feedback and best practices that we've been hearing from customers over the past several years. So we've got a second poll question to learn some feedback, because we would like to understand how you're using release management today, whether it's validating that something is ready for deployment, or if it's for managing maybe complex deployments like multiple change requests. We'd also like to understand the different things that you use for release, or what things you plan to use for DPR. So whether it's managing the entire life cycle, if are you using it for hardware or software or patches, how are you using it? Is it just software, or is it other things that you are managing? So we'll give about 60 seconds for this poll. And then there's actually a scroll, keep in mind. So if you did select other, we'd like to hear more. And then the last question is, how much have you customized release management v2? Just to what extent? Because I've seen lots of customizations. I've seen customers try and use it straight out of box. So curious the level of customizations across all the people on the call today. So real quick, while you're answering, there was one question that's come in that I'll show a little bit more later on, collisions with change and the CMDB. Right now, we are leveraging the CMDB much closer with digital product release, but change is still used for collision detection. So change conflicts are primary. We also do have some items because of official calendar support, but more kind of collision detection type of items are on our roadmap for next year. So if there's more and you want to put it in the chat for us to capture what types of kind of collision avoidance type scenarios you have, I'd love to learn more on that one. Okay, Kayla, do you want to end the poll?
Yep.
Okay, so good number using release for both validation and deployment. So that's a lot of the customers when I was originally talking were on the validation side, but it looks like release v2 customers are using it for both. And then what kind? Across the board. Probably should have had another question just on maybe percentage wise, but lots of software, but also some hardware use cases as well. So right now, digital product release, just from its name, is focused more on the software side, but supporting other types like hardware or service-oriented ones are one of our roadmap items for next year that we're planning to work on. And then for customizations, I'll be honest, I'm surprised that a third of people are using it out of the box. So customizations for tracking approvals, that's a very common one. Same thing with integrations. I guess while I've definitely talked with customers that have done a total overhaul, no one on this call has done it to that level. But we're definitely going to go into what DPR now has out of box. So thank you for those poll submissions. Okay, so what is digital product release trying to be? We're really focused on what I'll call a process orchestrator. There are tools in the market now that are focused on actually doing deployment. So CI/CD tools like Jenkins or Harness or Azure DevOps, they have pipelines that are really geared toward deploying software. We are focused on making sure that all of the things that need to happen are done before you do that deployment. So if you need to validate that stories are accepted, or you need to validate that tests are completed, or you need to validate through an approval that your maybe a central governance team needs to review it, or you have marketing that has to review it, or legal, or anything like that, any requirements that we have and we need to validate. How do we validate those activities have occurred? That's what we are really focused on. So we're not trying to replace the CI/CD pipeline. We're not trying to replace a code repository. We are taking information from those sources in order to help automate the process or to automate the validation of your release. And we do this through our integrations. Could have had another poll question just to see if people are familiar with DevOps change velocity. But we leverage the same integrations that DevOps change came with in order to pull data in from a variety of sources, or leveraging just ServiceNow's inherent ability to integrate with systems to pull in information. We pull that in so that we can automate answering the questions or automating the requirements that are used as gates throughout the process. So if as a part of kind of planning and scoping your release, you might have some tasks that need to occur, some approvals that need to occur. But if there's data that we can use, we have the notion of policies that look at data within ServiceNow to determine whether or not we are compliant or non-compliant with that policy. So if we need to ensure that all the stories are in a ready state, we can do that. Or as we get into user acceptance testing, if we need to validate that all of our unit tests are passing, or all of our functional tests are passing, or that security scans have occurred, we'll take in that data and validate that as well. So leveraging out-of-box integrations, or if there are custom tools that you leverage, leveraging those in order to pull information in, that's how we connect all of this together. And you'll be seeing that in the demonstration in just a little bit. Now, while we have support out of box for all these concepts, like connecting to CI/CD pipelines, or connecting to planning tools, or connecting to your source code repos, or artifact repositories, all those different integrations, you don't have to be doing those on day one to get started with DPR. Most customers that have really started with, we're going to get into visibility and tracking, where we can define what our process looks like. It's still going to be more manual, where we have people approving things, and we'll just get started with it. And then we start integrating with tools. Most of the time, customers plan to or are integrating with planning tools first, because they want to understand the scope of their release. So they'll connect a planning tool. Later, they'll start connecting their CI/CD pipeline and testing tools so that we can get data from those. And ultimately, like our ultimate goal is, by leveraging both digital product release and the abilities within DevOps change, that we can help streamline the entire process. So even the change request itself can just get created. We can look at the release for validation. We can have change policies to authorize the change. And the change is also a completely automated process to help streamline and kind of modernize governance, which is why we're part of the modern governance team here within ITSM. So again, you can get started. We're going to start today with more of the I'm just creating a release and I have manual things, and then we'll talk through some of the more advanced options as well. So for the demo, I'm going to go through some of the differences between Release v2 and how we do it in DPR, because some of the concepts are pretty closely aligned. Others, there's a bit of a difference. So we'll focus on how we can define a release and track a release, looking at both RMv2 out of box, and then how that really maps into DPR. And then we'll go into some DPR specific things. So how do we integrate with planning tools or other tools on the software development side? Just how would I get started? What does it look like to get started? And then also we're going to go over a bit of the migration utilities to help customers move from Release v2 into DPR, because again, they can live side by side. Okay, so I don't see any in the Q&A at the moment, so that's good for me to switch over. Okay, so I am in one of my instances, and I just have kind of a bare bones installation of Release Management v2. So not all customers were using this, but within Release, you could just create a release, or they could be tied to products. So I have a product defined here. This is just like my SAP. I'm going to be doing an update to it. And so I can create, a new release. And creating a new release out of the box is just saying, I want to make a new release. I'll give it a name. I'm really good at naming things. So we've got a new one. And then if I want to build it out, again, out of the box, I would have to go in and manually create phases. So I can specify what my phases are. I can create new a whole lot. So I'd have maybe my planning phase, and I'd give it some time, which I'm going to skip for today. If I have some tasks within it, I have to drill in and do those tasks. Now, this is an area where I have seen customers put some sort of automation in place where the phases and tasks get created for them, because nobody wants to click the new button every single time, and also make sure that everything is done properly. I'm going to go to a pre-set up release for talking to the rest of it. We also can connect other things to the release. So if I have some epics or some stories, I can connect those as well. This was, I believe, the last enhancement we made to Release v2, where you can attach additional tasks, but you have to know what you're looking for. So when I click the attach button, I need to know what the epic number is, and I can then attach things that I need to validate or watch as a part of the scope of this release. So, out of box, that's how things work. But now I'm going to switch over into digital product release and go through some of these same concepts, but show how things are done from DPR's perspective. So first of all, DPR is a dedicated experience. So under workspaces, you would find digital product release workspace. And I'm logged in as someone who can do pretty much everything. I might change roles through the process, but I'm going to be logged in as Joe. And Joe has some active releases. You can see we have a dashboard out of the box. We do have a process to help you get started. Digital product release can be implemented as more of a turnkey solution. So some of our customers have leveraged a partner to implement DPR. Other customers have just turned it on and followed this process and gotten going themselves. Usually the big difference between a partner involvement or doing it themselves is how much of their change process they will also be modifying in order to account for DPR. Because again, a lot of customers have put change related concepts into change management. So if you're going to unwind those, more likely a partner is needed. But to get started, you do not need partner implementation. You also don't need a system administrator, with the exception of turning on the application for the first time. But we do have products as our central kind of concept. So if I go into the products section, and good, it didn't log me out during the list, I have a list of all of my products. Now, Release v2 had a products tab, but it was a standalone products table. It wasn't connected to anything else within the CMDB. While I use the term products and digital products, the table where this is actually residing is a part of the CMDB. This is based on the Common Services Data Model's best practices. So I am helping to put things in the right place. And in fact, this probably already has data in it, especially if you're using business applications or if you're using like Agile Development 2.0. These will get pre-populated from that source. But if you do need to create a new one, you can create one. However, it's requesting it because, again, this is now a part of the CMDB. It's more closely aligned with ServiceNow best practices. And so you may need an approval process in order to create these records instead of just being able to create them. So we did put that in place. And then I have, my products. I'm going to go into Smart Shopper to talk about the products for a little bit before I navigate into one of the releases. So for Smart Shopper, I have, an overview of the product itself. And along the top, I have a couple other concepts. Oh, and by the way, for Kaylin, Biology, if there is a Q&A that I should answer immediately, just let me know and interrupt me, and it'll be fine with me. So for here, I'm in the overview of a product. And one of the first things you see is we have the notion of features. So this is what are the things the product's supposed to do. When you're looking at the scope of planning what's in a release, these are optional, but they allow you to start seeing what is it that this release is supposed to deliver. And then we have versions. So a release is making sure that a version is ready, and version is also a CMDB item. You'll see traceability that you start to get from leveraging these concepts now that we are closely aligned with the CMDB and the Common Services Data Model. And we can also define a hierarchy. So in this case, my Smart Shopper, I've broken out into components. Those can be broken out into even more components where I want to define the hierarchy in a bit more detail. So included products, optional. If you don't break things down more detailed, you don't have to do that. Product features are also optional, but the versions are needed. And again, we'll get into the benefits of saying that I have my August release, my May release, maybe use a numbering system. ServiceNow, as you all know, we use a naming convention of countries or cities, and we're going to then be able to do release planning. Now, release planning is allowing you to take the features and move them into the versions that you want to deliver them. Again, this is optional. If you're getting started and you don't track the scope of what's in the release, then you don't need to use this at all. All you would really do is say that I want to create a release either from this screen or from the next screen. So I think I have releases. No, so this one I could create a release. So I have this option to create a release, which allows me to give the release a name, define which product it's a part of, the version that it is. And then we have two more concepts that we're missing from Release Management v2. One of these is having a template. So when a release is created, you could have a variety of different processes that you follow in order to validate the release. So these are templates. Each template defines its own set of phases, its own set of tasks, its own set of approvals, its own set of policies that this particular release will follow. And we also have two different types of release phases. We have ones where the timeline of the release matters. So ServiceNow follows this kind of timeline type of approach. We have, Xanadu is, GA in a couple of weeks, but it's already in early access. And then we have, more releases coming in the future. We have them every 6 months. And then for the store releases, we have them every 3 months. So for those releases, we follow a calendar-based approach because we have very specific times that we have to be ready with our products before they become available to customers. But not all customers care about the timeline of their release. Some just need their phases to track activities. But as soon as the team is done, they can move from one phase to the next without any notion of time being involved. We support both concepts. But the templates allow you to define what your process looks like instead of having a one-size-fits-all or having to manually create all of the steps each time. The other item that's missing, and this goes into the calendar, is when do you plan on being ready for this release? So I have a bunch of release readiness dates. Like I could say this needs to be ready on the 15th of September, or this needs to be ready on January the 5th. These are aligning a little bit more to ServiceNow's release calendar. So if you are trying to target a specific date, from that point, the release and all of the dates aligned with it will be pivoting around whatever date you have chosen that your release needs to be ready by. Now, I'm not going to create the release for today because I have a whole bunch of releases already created. But once you create it, you will be able to start tracking your release.
So this might be a good time for I think a good question in the chat. So Vanessa is asking, particularly around with DPR, when you're requesting a product, I think really her question is, what's the relationship between digital products and business applications? She's asking, do you need to request products rather than creating a new business application or application service?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The actual table that this is all in is the application product model table, which is related to a business application. So starting in Vancouver, there is a job that the CMDB team put in place that will generate a application product model for every business application you have, because the recommendation is every business application should have an application product model. So if you're creating them there, then there's nothing additional for you to do. However, and this gets into how you want to track things, some products that you might need to go through a release are not business applications. And I believe we have a webinar coming up in October that's going to go into some of these concepts in more depth on the CMDB. But I'll give an example of a customer I was working with. They're a bank. They have a banking platform that has microservices within them. Those microservices are not business applications, but they do go through a release process. So while all of your business applications will show up here, there might be smaller things that you need to go through a release process that don't rise to the level of being a business application. So some of this is it depends on your specific scenario. But generally speaking, if it's going to go through a release process, it should be listed here. You should have a product entry for it. And in my example of Smart Shopper, I have these kind of smaller pieces as examples to show that we can model the hierarchy. But if the smaller pieces never go through a release process, then you really don't need to define them. You can just keep it at whatever level you do a release for. All right. Any other good ones that I should answer now, Kaylin?
I think let's keep moving forward, and then we'll save these for later on.
Okay. So next, I'm just going to go into a release. So I think I chose one that's technically old, so it's going to have a lot of red on its dashboard. But releases themselves, tracking a release in RMv2 was the same real experience from tracking a release or creating the release. It's just a form, and it would have, the various dates, and it would have the phases, and you could look inside of them to see any tasks that were there. But for digital product release, we have still this dedicated experience where we have things broken out into the dashboard. So again, right now, we were supposed to be done back in June, so our risk score is very high. There's a description, tasks are overdue, and we're past how much time is remaining. So the risk score is basically calculated on what's remaining versus how many days are left to complete them. And then we have a difference between readiness and end date. And this is kind of a subtle difference because some customers, the end date and the readiness date are the exact same thing. But other customers need to make sure that what they're delivering is ready days or weeks before you will actually deploy it. So it's not uncommon that I've talked with customers where they have a Wednesday readiness date because they do a deployment over the weekend and they want to make sure everything has gone through the change approvals before that weekend deployment. So Wednesday is the day that things have to be ready from a release perspective so that they can deploy over the weekend. It's a common scenario. So if you have additional things, maybe you have a post-release review that you want to track. That'll be a part of your release process, but definitely takes place after the release should be ready. So again, based on your process, and I'll show you when I get into release execution, you may have a difference of these days, or they might be the exact same. But we can also see things about tasks, any change requests that are open, features, stories, if we're tracking down to that level, which this one's not. And then I can move into release execution, which is where we have the actual process for this release. So again, this one, we're at the end. I've already gone through, we had a very, very long planning phase, which we had a series of tasks. So I can select the phase by just clicking into it. I have the tasks, which tell me what are the things that we need to do. Tasks can either be what I'll call regular tasks or approval tasks. A regular task is an activity. An approval task is something that a person needs to actually do as an approval. One of the questions, I believe about a third of respondents said that you've customized release v2 in order to get approval tracking. That is out of the box in DPR. So you can define who needs to approve things, and they will get a standard ServiceNow approval request right to them when the when basically the task moves to in progress. So they'll get that, and the task will not move to complete unless the approval is approved. So if they don't approve it, it will not move forward. It cannot move forward without that approval in place. So we can track all of the activities on more of a Kanban view. We obviously have the ability to switch over to a list view if you want to see all of the things that are being worked on. And then we'll go into policies in more depth in a later one. But policies give me the ability, this one is totally done, so I can't add any policies to it. But policies are basically the gates that you can use in order to decide whether or not you move from one phase to the next. And I've got another example in the second part of this overview where we'll go into more detail on some policies. We can also see the scope of the release. So these are all of the features that were added, so I can track them from here. And if we're aligned with planning tools, which you'll see in my more detailed view in a moment, then you will be able to see those here as well. And then finally, the one I do want to touch on for a little bit longer are change requests. So the interaction between change and release, we have made more dedicated and also streamlined the process for creation from the release side. So in release v2, there is a tab for changes, and you can either attach an already existing change, or by clicking on buttons enough, you could make a new change request. But the experience wasn't really built to be able to create a change request from release management. For DPR, it is designed to be able to raise a change from here. If you raise a change from SOW or from just our standard experience, you can still link it to the release. But if you're creating it from here, we do the linkage for you. We also include the more modern change experience where I can have like all of my different change models. We have our standard changes that are in place. So I could maybe just do a normal change. and then fill out the information on the change request. So this will be, once my change loads, I'll give it a fancy name. So we will call this some new change, because again, I'm good at naming things. And I now have a new change request that is attached and trackable from within DPR. I do see some information about the release because you can get to change requests from a couple of different areas in DPR. But I now, if I'm looking, I can track that I've got 2 different change requests related to this particular release. So however many changes you need, you will be able to see them here. And this includes if they are created from an automated fashion. But from a getting started perspective, you're able to define your products, you're able to create a release and have a connection with change, which change can also look back at the release if you're using it for risk assessment or using it for change policies. Because again, if we move the release concepts out of change management and into release, it really helps to simplify and streamline your change process. So this is the getting started side of DPR. The next, which going back to some specifics that are out of box with DPR that don't have a real out of box relationship, is integrating with tools. I'm going to use planning tools as an example, but I'll also talk through some more advanced policies that you can grow into if you're on the side that said we customized release v2 in order to add integrations with third-party software. And then we'll also talk about the migration. So let me move into a different release. Let's go into FMR Fall 4.0. All right, so this particular, actually, let me go into the product to talk about the integrations. So for FMR loan origination, we have a section here that I skipped over originally that is called external tools. This is where we start moving from having a just release to connecting with other systems in order to capture additional information. So leveraging the DevOps integrations, which comes with DPR out of the box. So there's nothing additional. If you're entitled to DPR, then you're entitled to these integrations. We have these concepts of planning tools. So this one is connected to 2 different systems. One is a Jira system. The other is GitHub. We're using this for example, with a customer. So there's Joe's GitHub. And we have a source code repo that we have connected this to. We have a couple of pipelines. We have both a CI pipeline and a deployment pipeline. And we're tracking to an artifact repository. So if you're a team, if you're someone on the team and you're like, I have a ADO plan that I want to associate, we have a button here saying associate plans that will allow you to pull from the list of already known about integrations. So your ServiceNow team is probably going to be involved in setting up the integration for the first time. We need things like credentials to connect. But once we know about your ADO connection, we know about your Jira server, and that's been set up, we'll then know about all of the projects that exist in those tools, and connecting them is as easy as finding yours on the list and then choosing to associate the plan. I'm not going to click associate for now because I don't need to import data and spend more time on it. But this experience was meant to be something that the teams can manage themselves. You don't need someone additional in order to get this connected. And it's the same for all of them, for repositories, for pipelines, for artifacts. Now, what that gets you is the ability to pull in additional things for the release scope. It also allows you to pull in additional metrics that could be coming from your build tools. So if I want to know how things are doing in our pipeline, or if I want to know how things are doing with an artifact, then this build didn't have a lot of information coming off of it, but there were some vulnerabilities found with this build. From a testing perspective, one of our test cases failed. We didn't have any functional or performance tests. We had a bunch of bugs that SolarCube was listing for us. but we will have access to this information from within DPR. So pulling things from GitHub, so the pipelines we're running in GitHub, and surfacing what's going on inside of DPR. So that's one of the benefits. But another benefit is that we're able to, from a release execution perspective, I can have policies that look at the data that we are getting from those third-party systems. So I have some policies like our regression tests are passing at a certain threshold, that our stories have associated code commits, so it's compliant. Down here, I have no critical vulnerabilities. So remember in the dashboard that I was just showing, there was a critical vulnerability found. Because that critical vulnerability was found, this particular policy is not compliant. And because it's not compliant, the release will not move forward without some sort of override. So I am logged in as an admin that can override things. But if I was a person on the product team or as a release manager, basically a non-admin, then this phase will not move forward because it is not meeting our criteria. It's not meeting our requirements. And these requirements are set centrally. So when you define those templates, you define what policies are required, and everybody has to adhere to them if that's a required policy. So you're able to codify your policies, and then ServiceNow will look at them and enforce that you are following these procedures. One thing to note is if you are using integrated risk management through ServiceNow, these policies do connect into IRM, so they can also be used as a part of your controls. So you can define these controls, and then this data will just feed into IRM. Just something to note if you are an IRM user. But leveraging these connections, which are now out of box, give you the ability to automate, where I don't have to have a person manually reviewing that we don't have critical vulnerabilities and attesting to it with approvals. Let's just use data to say whether or not we are compliant or not. So that's the more automated side of DPR that you can grow into. So we've got about...
we have,
go ahead.
You want to take one of the questions? There's two questions, one in chat, one with the raised hand. I figure we can take those quickly.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do the raise hand first. I don't know your name. It says Samsung, but you can talk. Samsung SM. You want to come off mute? All right. While they're figuring that out, we'll take the chat question then. Question from Jennifer asking if they have predetermined release or product naming conventions that they want folks to select. Is there a way to bulk upload that or enforce that on some kind of basis?
Yeah, so from a release naming perspective, you could definitely put a business rule in place. And in fact, one of the things we are looking into in the future is being able to auto-generate some of the names. But you definitely could put a rule in that enforces a convention. And for products, one of the reasons why we did have it as a request is because it's not uncommon for customers to bulk load the products from another source. So if you have another location that they're defined today, and you want to turn off the ability to create them manually, you can certainly do that and just use the data load in order to fill out that table. Now, depending on whether those are business applications or not, would be where the information should go. Because remember, any business application you create should also create a product listing in DPR. And the reason I bring that up is because I had a customer that's going live right now, and their products are being loaded in from an external source. So they don't want people to be able to create them. They are created in the external source and then data loaded into ServiceNow, so it just magically shows up in DPR. So yes, you can certainly do that.
All right. Samsung doesn't look like they can come off mute. So if you want to type your question in chat, we'll take it there. Go ahead, Colin. You can keep going forward.
Okay, so the last thing that I want to cover are the migration utilities. So when interviewing customers, we didn't get a lot of feedback on what we'd want customers to be able to migrate. And in fact, while we have several customers live now that we're using Release Management v2, so far, every one of them has just decided to start fresh. So RMv2 is legacy information, and they implemented from scratch DPR. However, there are a couple of areas that we see that we can help customers. One is, let's say you have a release in RMv2, and it's already laid out with all of the phases that you'd expect. It has tasks that you'd expect, and you want that to be a template. Well, we've added a button. Now you have to have the right role. So you have to have an admin role for this to show up. But you will add a button that says Create Template, which will basically tell you that the release template, it's only going to include phases and tasks. Content from child releases is not there. And if you click Continue, this will generate a template from this release. So this won't be a very interesting template, but if I click Create, then it will create a template for me, which will be in DPR, and it's actually now going to navigate me into the template experience because we do have a dedicated experience to say, I now have this. It has some phases, some tasks, and we have a dedicated experience for generating these templates, which allow me to go in and specify what all of them are. And then what the tasks are. I have to complete this before we go forward. But if I need to go in and say, because I didn't put any time, that that we start, and I have dev should be first. Let me go in and maybe add some dates to these. I'll just set them all at 5. And dev is really the first, so I'm going to move dev to being up top, and then I have test, which should be ahead, and then we've got 3 days for UAT. This is going to basically allow me to define what my phases are, and I can say at the end of UAT, I need to be ready. And again, now I've got, I don't think I had any tasks in this, but now I have the starting point of a template that comes from that release. So that's one of the migration utilities that we created. The other one is very similar, but it is for the products. So you can also import either, actually, let me go into products. You also can import, usually in bulk. I must not have turned that one on. So there's also one for product that does the same thing, that basically takes entries from the product table and has a button that will generate the new application product model. So the digital products, it will create entries there as well. Those were the two, as we were interviewing customers, that we got as feedback that might be helpful, even though, again, no one started to use them yet. So the last poll that let me stop sharing and switch over to that. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to keep sharing. All right, you'll launch the poll in just a second. So while we started with these items to simplify, to help streamline the move by creating products or creating templates, the next thing that we want to know as we wrap up for today, are there other things that you would find valuable to help with the migration from RMv2 into DPR? We launched these initial ones, but we know there's got to be more. So this is a great opportunity to give us feedback as to what other types of utilities would help you with that move. Balaji and I will be reviewing these, going through, because we own the backlog collectively. So we'll be going through, reviewing these. So now is a perfect time to let us know, how could we help you migrate from RMv2 to DPR? And then, are there other support resources that you would find valuable in helping with this transition. They will both live side by side, so this doesn't have to be a changeover before, like without being able to use RMv2. So we just want to understand how we can support customers like you that are using RMv2 that we want to help move to DPR. I'll give just another little bit of time. While you're responding, I'm going to check the Q&A. So I think I've seen this one come up a bit. What licenses is DPR a part of? So the caveat I always give is check with your account team, because some customers have specific contracts that will make this next statement incorrect. But generally speaking, ITSM Pro or one of the related SKUs from that is what DPR is licensed with. But again, check with your account team, because I've seen a lot of nuances between different customer contracts. And then when will DPR allow multiple products to be added to a release? This is now the only thing I've gone over that's a part of futures. That is active work. We've been doing small pieces along the way with release bundles, and then having included products within the product entry. In November, you're going to be able to create product bundles. So you'd have multiple products, but they're still managed independently, yet bundled for management. February is when we are planning to have the complete capability of multiple products in a single release. So small things we've been adding along the way, and February is when it should be, all the features should be completed.
I'm sharing the poll now.
Okay, so there's a question about more online documentation and online content like these types of webinars. So we'll definitely look into these. So I appreciate the feedback to help us get you all over to DPR. So I think, let me see, there was a new question that came in. Will this webinar be available? Caitlin, we're publishing these, correct? Yep.
Yeah, so this is being recorded. It's going to be posted to community. If you could actually go to the next slide there. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Colin. So we have a lot of great collateral and content already on community. We actually had a DPR Launch and Learn series that wrapped up last month that has deep dive sessions into various aspects of DPR. So if you haven't checked out our community page, please go there. We have a lot of really good content. We also have a series of short how-to videos that can help you get started with DPR. We also have a number of blogs and posts that go deeper into DPR concepts and can hopefully help you understand them a bit better. And then, of course, if you haven't yet, start experimenting with DPR in your subprod environments too. We have a question from Laura. I'll allow you to talk. Laura, go ahead and come off mute. If you're able to. Are you able to come off mute, Laura? All right, while you're figuring that out, a couple other questions coming into the Q&A from Freddie. You mentioned upfront that release and management v2 will be supported going forward. Should it be required? Is there an end of support deadline?
So the end of support is each customer's contract. So you are supported through the end of your current contract, however long that contract is. And that's the standard policy for supporting. And then are there other migration utilities to create templates? So there are two right now: creating templates from a release and creating a product from the products table. That can also be done in a scripted fashion. So we have scripted support as well. And that's why we asked the question, because even with our release v2 customers that we interviewed last year when we were building DPR, no one had any pressing ways that we could help them migrate. And so far, every release v2 customer has just started over. So I figured this crowd would be a great crowd to ask the question broadly. If there would be things that would help you. So these are the first two, but I doubt they will be the last. We're going to go through the responses, read them over, and see what else we can put in product to help with the migration.
Great. Looks like there's no further questions, and Laura's raised hand was not for a question. So I think we are good. Thank you, everybody, for joining today's webinar. Again, this recording will be posted to community, plus a lot of other great content. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.